Hey, good afternoon, everybody. My name is Rob Pirani. I'm the director of the New York, New Jersey Harbor and Estuary Program, and I'd like to welcome you to this panel on making an old story made new, swimming in the Hudson and Harbor. We are thrilled to have a great set of speakers and moderators here with you this afternoon. We're going to get started in a minute. I do want to do a couple of housekeeping things. First, though. So first of all, if you can remember to post your questions in the Q&A field on your Whova screen, that'd be great. You can ask us general questions about the conference in the chat, but any questions for the moderators or panelists, please put that in that Whova screen. And then in terms of, just a reminder that we have a community board, and you can, feel free to start conversations in the Whova board and in the community board on Whova, and let folks know what you're interested in and start a conversation there. With that, I'd like to kind of launch, and then you all should have one other thing. You all should have been asked to fill out a poll with 3 questions in it when you joined. If you did not get that poll, or maybe if you want to vote again, go to the polling tab and click there, and you should be able to find the poll there. So with that, we thought we'd open up this afternoon with a couple of short videos. One from Eric Nelson at the Palisades Interstate Park Commission kind of looks backward at the history of swimming. And then we have one from Rondi Davis at New York Open Water, who is kind of celebrating their swims that they do all up and down the Hudson River and in the estuary. So with that, I'm going to ask Emma, who's helping me out here, back of house, to launch the videos, and then we'll open back up with Chris Boyd, our moderator from Mark Strategies.
I've worked there since the early 1990s, and I'd say probably the most surprising thing for me when I started out was realizing that through the 1920s, 30s, and into the early 1940s, the biggest draw for people coming to this park was actually Hudson River bathing beaches, that people came to the park in order to take a dip in the Hudson River. What surprised me so much about that, of course, was that in my growing up, it was inculcated in us that the Hudson River was too polluted. You don't even want to stick your finger in it, let alone throw your whole body into the water. So to realize that that was different at a different time was kind of shocking to me. And rather than me just trying to describe what these scenes look like, let me just take a minute to share a few photos with you. So here we go. This is Bergen County, New Jersey in the 1930s. And this is Englewood Cliffs, New Jersey. In this photo, you can see crossing in front of the then brand new George Washington Bridge is a large ferry boat. This was the Dikeman Street Manhattan ferry boat that in its prime years of operation was bringing over 1 million vehicles a year across the Hudson River. It also brought thousands of people to the park in order to enjoy the facility. If you look here, you'll see on the left side, that's the New Jersey Tower of the brand new George Washington Bridge, right at the entrance to one of our largest swimming areas in the park at the time. It's called Hazard's Beach. You can see a large bathhouse that was built there in 1918 to accommodate people coming across the river who want to get changed to go swimming. And the New Jersey Tower of the bridge is on the right in this shot here. Many people came by canoe. There were boathouses in Manhattan that housed canoes for people. You could store your canoe there, then on the weekend take it out and take a paddle across the river. Typical scenes from a summer day in the 1930s. Remember, the Depression was raging in the country at this time. There were unemployment rates reaching about 25%. So this offered people a very inexpensive, a ferry ride or a canoe paddle across the river to take a day's vacation at a time when most families in the United States and in the cities couldn't afford to get away. Another big bathhouse in the park in Englewood Cliffs here. This is probably 1932. Lifeguarding was a trick in the river. For one thing, you may have noticed you often see in these swimming areas, you can see in the background here, these tall poles sticking out of the river. There's nets strung between those poles in order to help keep people in. Hudson has a very strong tidal current. On top of that, it's also a very murky river. The bottom is always stirred up by those tides. So it's a real challenge to be a lifeguard and keeping an eye on people, because once they go underwater, they can be hard to find. Nevertheless, I should add, we had a very good safety record in the park. Very few serious incidents during all this time. This is one of the last shots of bathing in the Hudson River, at least officially when the park was open. The last of our bathing beaches, and one by one they were closing as the economy got better, people could travel further from home. The George Washington Bridge ended up closing down some of the ferry lines that people had used to get to the park, and times changed. And then the final nail in the coffin, so to speak, was river pollution that they cited specifically from the war effort in the 1940s, from World War II. The big industrial effort of the war had made a noticeable change in water quality in the river. Here you see one of the first beaches to close in the park, right in the shadow of the George Washington Bridge. When I was in high school, I actually took a swim from this spot. It was at night, and a bunch of us were down there, and one thing led to another, and I decided to jump into the river. I just bring this up because of the two things I remember most from that experience. One was I jumped in the water, came up, and I was already 40 or 50 feet downstream and moving fast. There's a very strong current in the river. The other thing was, several showers later, I could still smell the river. It was very dirty in the 1970s. On the verge of starting to get cleaner, a lot of progress has been made. Here you see 1977, around the same time I took my swim in the river, and they're cleaning up an oil spill in the park from upriver. See some of the damage from that. The river really hit a low point in the mid-20th century. They were able to save some of the wildlife during that event. So the point is, the river was probably getting dirty when this photo was taken. It eventually has gotten much cleaner than it was, and with luck and hard work, it can continue to be made cleaner, and maybe someday we'll see crowds in the Hudson River again. Thanks for inviting me to talk today.
New York Open Water was formed for the purposes of providing safety, support, and funding for open water swimming and kayaking programs and events, while advocating for better stewardship of New York State's natural water resources and promoting public access to these waters. New York Open Water is a 501c3 organization. New York Open Water was founded in 2016 by marathon swimmers David Barra and Rondi Davies and kayaker Alex Arabalo. The organization aims to provide swimmers and kayakers with safe, challenging, and fulfilling open water adventures in and around the waters of New York City and New York State. It all started in 2011 when Barra and Davies organized test swims of what would become the Eight Bridges Hudson River Swim, a 120-mile, 7-day, 7-stage swim down the majestic Hudson River from the Rip Van Winkle Bridge near the Catskills to the Verrazano Narrows Bridge in the New York Harbor. The event that started with a handful of swimmers has since grown to be recognized as one of the top and longest marathon stage swims in the world, with many swimmers coming back every year to spend more time in the Hudson. For 1 week, each day's marathon swim begins with the ebb tide at one bridge and ends at the next, covering distances ranging from 13.2 miles to 19.8 miles. Swimmers can participate as solos or relays in one or all of the 7 stages. To date, 21 swimmers have completed the entire distance in 1 week, and swimmers have completed 677 stages. In 2016, New York Open Water took on the responsibility of running and sanctioning the newly named 20 Bridges Swim Around Manhattan. This is a 28.5 counterclockwise circumnavigation swim of Manhattan. This was an incredibly large undertaking, as the swim is part of the Triple Crown of marathon swimming, with the English Channel between England and France and the Catalina Channel in California, and there is a great demand to swim it. Since 2016, we have had over 300 swimmers from 44 countries successfully complete a lap of the island. In addition, 13 swimmers have completed 40 bridges, a double circumnavigation of Manhattan. 20 Bridges holds a storied more than 100-year history. In 1915, Robert Dowling was the first to complete a loop of the island, and since that time, there has been more than 1,200 recorded sanctioned swims. New York Open Water was able to operate the 20 Bridges swim during the pandemic in 2020 and 2021, and this video is of a recent swim from October 2021. In appreciation of New York Open Water reviving the swim around Manhattan, the Marathon Swimmers Federation awarded it with the 2016 Streeter Award for Service, and David Barra was inducted into the International Swimming Hall of Fame. In addition to the 8 Bridges, 20 Bridges, and 40 Bridges marathon swim events, New York Open Water hosts the Edley Burke Swim, a 16-mile marathon swim from the Battery in Manhattan to Sandy Hook in New Jersey. To give swimmers new to the sport a chance to get their feet wet, New York Open Water also organizes mass participant events such as the 2 Bridges, 2.5 and 5K swim under the walkway, a swim between the Mid-Hudson and Walkway bridges over the Hudson in Poughkeepsie, New York. And we also host the Spite and Dibble 10K swim from JFK Marina in Yonkers, past the Spite and Dibble Bridge to La Marina in Inwood, Manhattan. In case you're wondering about some of the rules and definitions of marathon swimming, a marathon swim is 10 kilometers or longer, and marathon swimmers embrace the challenge of crossing wild open bodies of water with minimal assistance beyond their own physical strength and mental fortitude. The standard equipment of the sport has not changed significantly since 1875. Swimmers must remain in the water for the entire duration of the swim, from start to finish, without intentional physical contact with escort vessels, support personnel, or other objects. New York Open Water donates money to charities that are aligned with our mission. Between 2016 and 2020, we have donated more than $50,000 to partnering organizations. We also offer significant discounts or scholarships to swimmers of ages 25 and under in order to promote the growth of the sport.
Welcome, everyone, to this important discussion, which I'm very pleased to be the moderator for. So I'm Chris Boyd. I'm a senior consultant with Mark Strategic Solutions, a public health, safety, and sustainability consultancy, and the former assistant commissioner for environmental sciences and engineering at the New York City Department of Health, where I had responsibility for overseeing safety of public beaches, and sadly sadly investigating the root causes of drowning incidents that occur within the city of New York. Today's panel is going to talk very specifically to some of the core themes that were raised in the opening keynote presentations for today. And we've got a great lineup of speakers. We've got Karen Frillman and Shanna Blanchard, Kara Meyer, and Dan Shapley, and Shawn Slevin. Shanna is the Director of Strategic Partnerships and Projects at Jamaica Bay Rockaway Parks Conservancy. And she works with the Surfrider Foundation of New York City. Karen Frillman is the founding board member of Riverpool at Beacon, a floating flow-through structure located on the Hudson River at Dutchess County, an example of the private sector coming up with innovative solutions to allow for primary contact with our water body. Kara Meyer is the managing director of Plus Pool, which she oversees the development of the world's first water filtering floating swimming pool. And she helped establish the 501c3 Friends of Plus Pool in 2015. They're on the verge of a very interesting project with in coordination with New York City DEC. Another example of innovative interventions from the private sector to make water primary contact swimming available to local communities. And Dan Shapley is a lifelong Hudson Valley resident. He joined Riverkeeper in October of 2011 and is the director of Riverkeeper's Water Quality Program. And he'll be speaking to both the informal and formal interactions with our water body up and down the Hudson. And Shawn Slevin, who started the Swim Strong Foundation in 2006 to reduce drowning incidents. We'll talk to how we have to both combine water safety and swimming skills as part of our solution strategy to ensure equitable access to our water body. So I'm going to give a few opening remarks to frame our conversation and give some thought to the audience to be thinking about, some ideas for you to be thinking about as you hear the presentations. And so what we're seeing now is we're reaping the benefits of the Hudson River Foundation's 40 years of commitment to improving the conditions of the ecological communities throughout the New York and New Jersey Harbor and the Hudson River, and creating neutral spaces for convening. And I think what's really critical about this particular conference is the centering of human communities and the intersection between human communities and ecological communities, and how we approach the opportunities that are afforded to us as a result of that 40-year commitment to improving the ecological conditions that are opening up new avenues for interaction of human communities with our water bodies in ways that we couldn't have contemplated. As we saw in the first video, we couldn't have contemplated that in 1970, right? We've made such progress that now we can contemplate it. But now that we're contemplating, we have to ask some of these hard questions about who gets access, how do they get access, is it equitably distributed, is it secure and safe for everybody? And how do we incorporate the historical patterns that have separated some communities from being able to interact with our water bodies in ways that prohibit them now for interacting safely? And so this panel sits squarely at the center of that conversation of this intersection between human and ecological communities. And I know that you're going to find the stories that we're talking about both challenging and opportunities for dialogue. And so some of the things I'd like us to think about as we hear the presentations: which human communities are taking advantage of our ecological progress? And what action should we be taking to ensure that we have safe, secure, and equitable access for all of our human communities? Which public sector agencies, a different set of communities, are involved in determining where, when, and how, and why human communities can access our waterways? And are these public sector communities working collaboratively to advance both the human and ecological community intersections? Are we getting the good coordination from the public sector to advance multiple goals as we look at the harbor estuary? And our panelists are going to be raising questions about that very specific question. And our planned public investments in the waterfront and the access to waterways being properly coordinated with the agencies that are responsible for making sure that activity happens safely? And are we making sure that the right human communities are involved in that planning process so that it happens in an equitable way? And then finally, as this panel is focused on the intersection of communities and our waterways, what are some of the fundamental scientific and research questions we should be asking and pursuing to make sure that the advances that we're seeing on the ecological side have the human community outcomes that we're looking for? And with that, I will turn it over to our first speaker, which is Meyer, to give us an update about the progress of Plus Blue.
Hi, everyone. I'm from Plus Pool. Some of you may have heard of us. For those of you that have not, about 10 years ago, this rendering captured the imagination of so many when a group of designers proposed a water filtering floating swimming pool. For the New York Harbor, the pool would filter river water through the walls of the pool to create a safe swimming space, discharge clean water back into the river to the source, and provide a platform for citizens to enjoy their natural environment. It was conceptualized as an inclusive public space designed for everyone with multifunctional use: a kids pool, a sports pool, a lounge pool, and a lap pool, all put together. And while this technology was a new innovation, swimming in the East River was not a new idea. Until the 1900s, New Yorkers enjoyed regular access to the rivers. Perhaps no group more than the tenement children of the Lower East Side, including future New York City Governor Alfred E. Smith, who said in his 1929 autobiography, the East River was the place for swimming, and as early as April and as late as October, the refreshing waters of the East River, free entirely at the time from pollution, offered the small boy all the joys. And as I believe many of you know as well on this call, in 1890, there were 15 floating bathhouses installed in New York City, utilizing the river to bring the public health benefits of river swimming to the working class. These were incredible social spaces for the many New Yorkers who didn't have the means to swim in private clubs or drive out east, and were really great amenities for marginalized communities because it became an important catalyst for socioeconomic equity, really. And so this was our contemporary version of that. It would protect swimmers from the currents, provide regular access to the river, irregardless of fluctuations in water quality, and also ensure safety in the swimming environment from residual contamination from bathers and users, skin shedding, and things like that. Early on, the first few years, there was a lot of negativity, but we and how to realize something like this, but also a lot of momentum and a lot of community support. We launched a Kickstarter that funded the first feasibility studies and this test at Brooklyn Bridge Park. We signed on Arup to help develop the engineering program for us, the filtration system for us. A second Kickstarter raised $250,000, which demonstrated to us that there was a strong desire from the public for this kind of access. And it facilitated in-river tests at Pier 40. This is what we called the float lab. And after we understood that this concept was a feasible concept, we could do this without chemical disinfectants, we incorporated as a 501c3 to support the final realization. This was both because we wanted it to be a public space that was community driven and community supported, but also because we knew we needed an organization to steward the project once it opened. And we started visualizing our data very early on, using our design backgrounds to share with the public what had really been completely inaccessible to us in terms of understanding water quality previously. This was our first dashboard that we developed in partnership with Google. And the project continued to generate a lot of enthusiasm. This attracted attention from press around the world. This resulted in invitations for us to meet with people in other cities, other municipalities, Munich, Berlin, Sydney, Vancouver, invitations to lecture, invitations to exhibitions. And we sort of established this unofficial network of urban swim projects around the world with urban swim enthusiasts. We were advising, we were supporting. I'm on a WhatsApp group with these people. We nerd out on urban swimming every day. And the nonprofit in 2015 started talking to the mayor's office. We did a series of site feasibility studies. We started to launch our educational programming, and we did what we call our Swim in the River campaign. We have classroom curriculum that uses PlusPool to teach STEM. We specialize some of that programming or some of that curriculum where capacity allows and where there is interest. This is a group of sixth graders who have been studying PlusPool for a couple of years, or the entire class. It's really focused on advocacy. Other specialized courses have included studying the design thinking process, where students actually design their own public spaces and solutions to environmental problems, and we'll jury them as the designers of PlusPool will jury them. We launched a free Learn to Swim program for low-income youth. Our Bluefish program, it's since served hundreds of kids across 3 boroughs and is meant to ensure really everyone has the skills needed to get in the water. When PlusPool is built, we target communities that have historically not had access to swim lessons, so that our facility will be accessible to all once open and people will be able to get in the water. We host a variety of water stewardship events and cleanups to demonstrate how our actions impact the water quality. And we launched, because our siting was moving not as swiftly as we had hoped due to a myriad of public or political reasons I won't get into right now, we launched a Swim in the River campaign that engaged hundreds of thousands, resulted in op-eds, an online petition of tens of thousands of New Yorkers telling the administration that they wanted access to the river, and they wanted that through PlusPool. In 2018, we began to really experiment with real-time water quality monitoring, in addition to a regular data collection. We launched it in this form of this public artwork. And in 2019, finally, after years of advocacy and somewhat shortly after the Swim in the River campaign, NYC-EDC released an RFEI for a self-filtering floating swimming pool in the waters along the Brooklyn Bridge Esplanade, and we responded to the call. Cue applause. And of course, this was right before COVID. This was our public artwork we installed in the river. It changed colors based on the quality of the water in the river in real time. It was meant to really show people what the water quality was doing, and that it's not as bad as people might think. Majority of the time, it was blue and it was safe for swimming, which was a majority of the time. And to that end, we enhanced our dashboard as well, and worked with many of you in this room, I'm sure, and made the water quality parameters work to really make them digestible for the public visually. I think it's important to note that there's a lack of adequate swimming facilities in New York City. I believe some other panelists will be speaking to this as well. This causes problems during COVID-19, when only 15 of the 53 outdoor public pools opened in the summer. There were some issues with people jumping in the river and some unfortunate incidences, but even still, there's only 1 public pool to every 150,000 New Yorkers. In comparable cities, it's more like 1 to every 20,000. But the good news is that in May 2021, after nearly 2 years of delays and a review by NYC-EDC, we received a notice to proceed with due diligence on the project in the waters north of the Manhattan Bridge. This is a rendering of PlusPool at the site designated by NYC-EDC, which will serve the Two Bridges neighborhood of the Lower East Side and the larger NYC community and its visitors. And everyone was still excited. I mean, this attracted more press and inquiries than we could respond to. And there was great enthusiasm around this new public space in a year after COVID. And so we started to think, how can we contribute to the city's rebuilding in a post-COVID world? A critical next step for Plus Pool had always been to pilot the filtration system at the site where we would be installing Plus Pool to collect data needed for a third-party certification of the system. This is what we understood to be a requirement for deploying it. But NYCDC was also very interested in doing further due diligence to pilot operations, maintenance, and water quality monitoring of what would likely be NYC's first East River swimming facility in more than 100 years. And so we thought about deconstructing Plus Pool, and we would bring the pilot to the site, a lab or an on-site lab where we could run water quality samples right there, but also create a flexible programming space for educational purposes, and a public access point. We proposed this to pilot the water quality monitoring and the operations as we seek a third-party certification for the filtration system. This would be a public access point operated and open when river conditions are met naturally without filtration, which we estimate based on all of our historic data and a lot of the data from all of you is about 60 to 70% of the time. We call it Plus Beach. It will be a temporary installation open for one season. It will accommodate 120 bathers at a time, 100 some bathers. This is our ambitious timeline proposed to EDC for an opening as early as next summer, which we're still working on and working every day with EDC on. It will also allow us to pilot our community-based programming and advance new initiatives at what will one day be a permanent facility, we hope. But I think what's more is that while we're proposing this for one season to diligence Plus Pool, conceptually this structure or something like it, should the permitting gods allow, the structure itself could be used as an anchor to test subsequent swimming sites all around the city. There are challenges that we have with this. We are piloting swimming in Class 1 waters. This is, there's no existing regulatory structure for this. We are inventing it in many ways. There are challenges across the regulatory, the financing, and insurance and regulatory. Again, no existing structure for what we're proposing. There are no standards for monitoring water quality bodies, not currently classified for primary contact. There are no standards for staffing, staff training, safety protocols, maintenance for an East River floating swimming facility. Financing, we have had no public financial investments in our work to date. And there's no real obvious insurance carrier, so we imagine that's going to be costly. But it's totally doable. There are several cities around the world that are doing this, using their once polluted waterways for recreational use. France, Denmark, Germany, they're also very popular. They're successful. They're economic development drivers. And while these facilities in particular are available largely thanks to major municipal investments from cities, such as those that redirect CSOs, we believe we can make those incremental steps to create conditional access, and in doing so, raise public awareness of the issues so that infrastructure upgrades can become a priority for citizens and our elected leaders, just like these cities have. And, quite frankly, NYC is behind. These cities, have invested in their rivers in a different way and have devoted years of work to achieve the standards needed for unfettered access. So, we have a vision.
We're coming into time.
Yeah,
Kara,
that's all.
sorry.
It's time to go back to the river.
And it's time to return to the river. Well, great. So thank you so much for that. That's a great demonstration of the innovation that's happening within the private sector to advance our goal of increasing access, and that dovetails with an ongoing existing project that Karen has organized up in her neck of New York, and she'll give us an overview of how they've approached that. And so I want to just turn it over to Karen, and away we go.
Thank you. Welcome, everybody. And let me share my screen. So I bring you greetings from a river community about 65 miles north of New York City, Beacon, New York, and we are on the east side of the river across from Newburgh, New York. And I represent a small nonprofit organization, Riverpool at Beacon, that has been facilitating swimming in the Hudson River for the past 18 years. We're fueled by passion, volunteers, citizen scientists, and the deep satisfaction of seeing one part of our natural world improve. We had the great good fortune to have a visionary as our founder, the late Pete Seeger. And this is Pete from the Newburgh side of the river. We're in the Hudson Highlands. And this was at one of our many meetings over the course of time to make this happen. And Pete believed that the waterways should be, and more importantly, could be reclaimed for recreational use. After raising the money to build the sailboat Clearwater and sailing it to Washington, D.C. to advocate for the Clean Water Act, he turned his mind to figuring out how to give people access to swim. And I mean, there may be people in this audience. Pete talked about floating pools and getting people back into the water. I mean, he started talking about it in the 70s. And we have, in fact, built a swimming pool that is a wading pool. It is a consistent 30 inches deep. It sits at the edge of a park that was once a garbage dump and is now a capped landfill. So it's even sweeter. I mean, it's a reclaimed, Metro North operated this dump, and they would fill old train cars with garbage and light it on fire once a week and to burn their garbage. And so that was capped, and eventually that was capped in the late 70s, I think, early 80s. And our little pool sits off the edge of it. Pete's theory was that if we were in the water, if we were swimming in the water, we would keep it clean, and that we would never, ever let it become an indiscriminate dumping ground for raw sewage or industrial chemicals. And so we were founded to provide safe access, educate the general public about the importance of continuing to preserve and clean the Hudson, promote swimming, and demonstrate to other communities the viability of floating pools. Pete, and I should add, Toshi Seeger, his wife, were both very actively engaged in this with us. And like the other historic photos we've seen, Pete remembered seeing photos of swimmers in the water. He knew it was possible. And so we began to imagine, we began to test the waters, and we began to think about how we could do this in near the city of Beacon. And of course, there's, you know, as has also been discussed, there are a lot of problems to solve. The river has been highly manipulated. With this, our pool sits off of a park that's got riprap around it, right? So it's not as if you can walk into the river. Metro North runs along much of the northern part of the, once you leave New York City, separating people from access to the river. There's the currents, there's water quality, there's the tides, which gives you changing depths. There's turbidity, which has been mentioned. I mean, so that you really can't see very deeply into the river. There's boat traffic. And once you begin to think about putting structures into the water, You've got to deal with river bottom shading, avoiding catching fish, making sure that whatever facility you're using is safe for kids. Where we are, we have the river freezes. And so we need to we take our structure in and out every year. So this was a design Pete attracted many people to this idea. And one of them was an architect, Meta Brunzema. I don't know, some of you may know Meta. She's based in New York City. She may be here today, but she became engaged by the idea and she designed this pool, which has a floating rubber tube, which is fiberglass seats are attached to it, and it's anchored in the river by helical anchors, which we unhook every year as we take the pool in and out. Because the river, goes both ways, and because of the tidal change, the pool needs to be able to go up and down, which it does, and keep a steady depth of about 30 inches. We built this prototype. We received money from DEC to build this prototype. They assisted in the building of this just to see if it was possible, if it would work. Permitting and testing was about a 24-month process. We had to deal with the Army Corps of Engineers. Turns out the short-nosed sturgeon breed in this part of the Hudson. We had to make sure that our pool did not affect that breeding ground. You can see in this picture, the bottom of the pool is made of, it's almost like a trampoline, and it's made of Dyneema, which is something that's used in fisheries. And it, that we had to make sure that the holes weren't too big, that kids would get their feet caught. We had to make sure that the fish wouldn't get caught in it. So we had to go through a
3 minutes, Karen.
Testing process. Dutchess County, we worked with Dutchess County Health Department, and this spot in the river is consistently clean, but we do test the water on a weekly basis. And we put this pool together ourselves. We're a volunteer organization. We bring it in and bring it out every year. I often say we feel like carnies who set up an amusement park ride. This was a day of testing where we checked, see if it worked, and we finally got the pool in. In order to help fund this pool, I started this swim across the river from Newburgh to Beacon. As I like to say, I'm in this organization for the swimming. I grew up in New York City in a neighborhood that did not have a swimming pool, Southeast Queens. I can attest to the fact that it's no fun to go through the summer without a place to swim. And I was extremely excited to help liberate the Hudson River. Every year we swim from Newburgh to Beacon and ask folks to raise money to help support the pool. And we have, it's just, I remember Pete saying the first year, do you think anybody's gonna come? Will people come and swim? I said, Pete, they will come, don't worry. And it's just the pool is a little joy machine, and the annual swim is just such an affirmation of why we're all gathered here today, because it's a great body of water. We have kayakers who escort our swimmers across. This was the image of our first swim. Since that day, we've put 15,000 people, swimmers in the small pool and swimmers crossing the river into the Hudson safely. And safety is a huge concern of ours, and we don't forget it. We have We engaged with ocean and coastal consultants to help us build a larger pool. The small pool, delightful as it is, has a lot of issues. And this pool is basically made out of much more marine decking. We do not, where we are in the Hudson, there's insufficient depth for us to basically put this large pool. And so we are without a site at the moment. We have found a site that is controlled by Scenic Hudson that has good depth, but we have yet to get permission to use that site. So we are, the prototype of the large pool has yet to be proven, but we have a design, and this is a design that would also be anchored into the river and taken out, designed so that it could come in and out. And
Super
so,
impressive, Karen.
yeah,
Super
that's
impressive.
where we are. If you want to contact me or contact us, please do so. We are passionate about the work.
Well, great. That was another wonderful example of the innovation that's coming to connect our ecological and human communities together along the diverse waterways. Now we're going to be hearing from Dan, and he's going to give us some insights into how Riverkeeper is approaching these issues. And I'll give it away to you.
All right. Hello, everyone. Thank you for having me. And I'm really delighted to be a part of this panel. My name's Dan Shapley, and I'm with Hudson Riverkeeper. In this talk, really pretty simple, gonna cover just a couple points. The main point is people swim. And I love Karen's phrase, the little joy machine. The Hudson's like a big joy machine overall, right? I mean, we always talk about the human right to water, and we tend to think of that for obvious reasons as clean drinking water. But I think that the access to the joy that comes from going to the water, getting in the water is just there's something basic and human about it. And we see over and over again that where there is water and where there are people, those people are going to find the water. So you want to make that water safe for them because they're going to go. But we find is that water isn't always meeting that standard of beach quality. And in fact, our regulations and the way we're implementing them aren't really reaching for that consistently as we would like. So these facts here are based on observations that our boat captain has made over 20 plus years. It wasn't designed as a scientific survey, but when you are out on the water consistently month after month, going on the same route for 20 years and observing the same locations, you get a pretty good idea of what's going on. And so we see that, of course, the Hudson River, this is north of New York City up to Troy. There are 5 official bathing areas, 4 of them public, 1 private. But then there are another 8 locations where on those same days where it's warm enough and nice enough for people to be swimming at the public beaches, they're also swimming at these locations, even though they're unofficial, unsanctioned, no lifeguards and whatnot, but they are used just as frequently. And then multiples of that, 38 locations at least that based on his observations are used maybe less frequently for swimming or as frequently, but more for activities like jet skiing or tubing or kayaking. And I would say that many of those activities, it's as important to have clean water. If you're thinking about a jet ski and getting that spray of water up your nose, that's not a whole lot different than taking a mouthful of water when you're swimming. And of course, just to make the point, and I think others have made it earlier in the conference, but we should anticipate that we're going to need more access to water. People are going to need to cool off more and more places. It's only going to get hotter, as we know. And some of the places that we're enjoying now are unfortunately going to be underwater. So there's pretty big changes coming that we need to prepare for. So just very quickly to look at these, this is, it'll become more apparent as I go through these, but this is showing New York in the south and Troy to the north. So that's the tidal estuary. The rises and falls with the tides twice a day, connected to the ocean, our Hudson River. Here are our 5 official bathing beaches where you have a lifeguard and the water quality is monitored routinely. Here are those 8 locations layered on there where we see just as much activity on those nice beach days as you would at the beach. And then, you know, not surprisingly, once you start to look at more areas that are used, you know, with a little less regularity, or for those other uses that are like swimming or maybe a little less intensive, but still important for water quality, it's just about everywhere. It's at least widespread throughout the whole. So this is the people's beach. People are going to the river and finding their spot up and down, and that's what we want, right? We want people to enjoy the joy of going to the river, but we need to make sure that the water quality is safe for those uses. As I said, it's only officially water quality is only officially monitored at those official public bathing beaches and private beaches like Karen's River Pool. Most of the locations that Riverkeeper and our partners at Columbia University, Lamont Doherty Earth Observatory have monitored for 10+ years. We find most locations meet EPA criteria for safe swimming most of the time. Great news, about 80% of the samples come back beach quality. But that 20% leaves a lot of room for people getting in the water where it is unsafe, at times that it is unsafe. And I'd say the best example of that is your Thursday night thunderstorm in the height of summer, followed by Saturday, Sunday, where it's beautiful and hot and you want to get in the water. But it's after those rainstorms when you have your sewage overflows and your massive amounts of runoff from the landscape that can really compromise water quality. And those types of storms, those extremes, are another thing that we need to contend with climate change. The water quality, we're already seeing, even in this last year, when we had some of these really rainy months or just rainy, intense one-day rainstorms, the water quality is poor across long stretches of the river, really surprising extent of the impact from some of these rain events. So just very quickly, some of what we learned about water quality in the Hudson River over the 10+ years we've been monitoring. This red, yellow, green system is just a simple way to understand how our data layers on to EPA criteria. So the red means, you know, the average water quality, if you will, to be simplistic in the language, does not support swimming according to EPA standards. The yellow is poor water quality at times, good water quality other times, typically the poor water quality coming after rain, and then green is generally good. And in the middle of the channel, we see overall, you know, lots of green, and really these reds and yellows are mostly in the Capital District, where you see a heavy influence of combined sewers having a big influence on the river. But otherwise, the middle of the river, largely good water quality. Near shore, you see a very big impact from rain, right? And that makes sense. You're getting a lot of runoff and a lot of impact from that runoff. In our tidal tributaries, this has surprised a lot of people. This is like the Rondout Creek, Sopus Creek, places that are beautiful, near communities, sheltered waters. Generally, you would think good places for swimming and other activity, but a lot of influence of rain and some water quality in some places not you know, not meeting standards even in dry weather. And to that last point, you know, we have anniversary coming up next year, 50 years of the Clean Water Act, and we made obviously a huge progress. But that basic goal of swimmable water quality, we haven't met, and we're haven't met everywhere, I should say. And this second bullet, this phrase, the water quality shall be suitable for primary and secondary contact recreation. That phrase comes from our New York State regulations, and it's meant to apply to all waters. We have a classification system where the state agency implements the Clean Water Act by saying these waters are best for swimming, these are best for drinking, but the regulations say all waters should meet safe swimming levels of safe swimming. I know it's a goal of Kara's and Karen's and all of ours to see that happen. But we are concerned that we're seeing instances and significant ones where the state and federal governments are not backing this goal and are in fact stepping away and saying our Class C waters, which include places like a third of the Hudson River, the Esopus Creek, the Rondout Creek, our SD and I waters, which is many of the waters around New York City. The state's basically saying, we don't need to meet
2 minutes, Dan, just so
swimming
you know.
standards. You got it, I'm basically done. And so we at Riverkeeper, we have a couple of lawsuits. I'm not going to go into them deeply here, but they're trying to make sure that the Clean Water Act is put to use as it should be, which is to say that where people are swimming or should be swimming, we're driving towards getting that water safe for swimming, and that we're using modern standards to measure that water quality to know if we've met that standard. So with that, thank you very much. And you can find a lot more information, including all the data that we've taken over these many years at riverkeeper.org. Thank you very much.
Great. Well, thank you so much, Dan. That was a great overview of both the formal and informal uses. So that leads us into the critical question of how do we make sure that when we have that access happen, whether it's informal or formal, we can get that done in a safe way, a safe and secure way. And so now we're going to hear from Shawn and Shanna, who are going to help us out and understand that.
Thank you, Chris. Let me just pull this up. All right. Hi, everyone. Good afternoon. We're excited to be here today. My name is Shanna Blanchard, and along with Shawn, we're here to represent, let me just start this, sorry, the Water Safety Coalition. We're a fairly newly formed group based on in Rockaway currently, but there's ample opportunity to extend our work. And we're here today to talk a little bit about water safety as it relates to increasing swimming access and access to public space in general. The Water Safety Coalition is a group of multiple organizations, but today myself and Shawn will be representing the coalition. I'm with the Jamaica Bay Rockaway Parks Conservancy. We're a nonprofit public-private partnership that supports parkland in Jamaica Bay and Rockaway in New York City that extends across Brooklyn and Queens, and it's 10,000 acres of parkland that includes city, state, and federal parkland. And our work is, pretty broad. We do a lot of public programming, education programs, capital planning and project implementation, and stewardship and restoration projects. And Shawn Slevin from Swim Strong Foundation is joining me today to represent the coalition. And Shawn?
Hi, everyone. I'm Shawn Slevin. And in addition to what Chris mentioned to you, Swim Strong Foundation is celebrating our 15th anniversary this year. So we've taught over 10,000 people how to swim. We have given over $1 million in free swim lessons to families that needed that help. We have developed an out of water training program called KNOW, K-N-O-W, Before You Go. And we also have initiated some legislation, which we'll address later.
Thank you, Shawn. So the Water Safety Coalition is a group of concerned citizens, community groups, nonprofit organizations, and local Rockaway businesses that are working to make water safety education an essential right for all to save lives and create a more inclusive recreation community with a focus on the Rockaway Peninsula in Queens, New York. This is kind of setting the stage if you're not familiar with Rockaway. It's at the end of New York City. It hosts 11 miles of oceanfront. It borders Jamaica Bay, which is here in the center. It's an 18,000 acre estuary. Around 150,000 residents live on Rockaway. It hosts millions of visitors each year, and unfortunately also hosts numerous drownings each year. There's ample parkland here, as you can see from this map. There's national parkland, which is the dark green color. There's city parkland, which is the lime green color, and then the sort of jade color is state parkland. So there's ample opportunity for access to the water. There are also many barriers in terms of access to the water, including social and economic barriers, but also physical barriers like the Bell Parkway. It's also something that was planned historically to not serve necessarily all communities. So while there's a lot of water here, completely surrounded by water, there are some challenges both in accessing the water, but there's also a lot of open access to the water. And Rockaway itself, both on the bay side and the beach side, hosts some very dangerous water sometimes, even for the most experienced swimmers. So that kind of led us to building this coalition based on the annual drownings that do occur in Rockaway. You can read about them, unfortunately, every year. So that's what led to building our coalition based in Rockaway. We're currently working on legislation that Shawn will talk about to make water safety mandated in schools. That's a New York State bill. And then we're also working on various other initiatives to raise awareness for water safety. And I'll let Shawn take it from here.
Thank you. So what is it that attracts us so much to the water? Is it because in the dawn of time, we as a species actually came from the water? Is it because more recently we came from our mother's wombs? Or is it because we have our own bodies made up of 78% water? Whatever it is, we all love the water, and nobody goes to the water and expects a bad outcome. But sadly, we do know that bad things can and do happen to other people until, of course, it happens to ourselves, and then it's too late. Next slide, please. So what we're looking at here is the Flushing Meadow Aquatics pool, not filled. And for a preeminent global city, New York is definitely an aquatics desert. Why do I say that? Because the Parks Department has the largest footprint of public pools, and I think Kara mentioned this earlier, about 56 of them or so, but only about a dozen are actually swimming pools. The rest of them are wading pools. And of that dozen, half of them, at best, are actually available year-round. So we have a dearth of pools that are multi-use and available for the public to learn how to swim, not only basic swimming skills, but advanced skills as well. And the other issue, quite frankly, is that when you think about how people kept their families safe from water, it was really an issue that pools, of course, were the first place of refuge for us because they were stable environments. But since we have so few of them here in the city, it's very natural that we are going to turn to other open bodies of water to swim, particularly our rivers and our harbor. So that's why this commission is so important. Thank you, Shanna. What you're seeing now, I'm going to talk a little bit about the big picture of water safety issues. This is one of our PSAs, an infographic that shares the different places that people can drown and the different circumstances surrounding it. Some of those will be familiar to you, others not so much. I think you may see a few surprises. So I'll let you look at that for a moment. And just to tell you on a global basis, a person actually dies every 70 seconds due to drowning. And with every death, 5 more people are suffering life-altering brain and spinal cord injuries due to water-based accidents. Coming here in the United States, we suffer about 10 people drowning per day. You can move the slide forward, Shanna, thank you. 10 people drowning per day with the commensurate 50 people with these brain and spinal cord injuries due to the water-based accidents. So this clearly is an issue of global importance. As a matter of fact, drowning is a global epidemic. And as shocking as these statistics may be, what is even more abhorrent is the fact that 95% of these incidents never had to happen. They were preventable. When it comes to looking at communities of color, you can look at children who are 14 years and younger and realize that those children are drowning 3 times more in open water, 5 times more in swimming pools than their Caucasian peers. This shouldn't be happening. There's a very simple solution to this issue, and it's teaching water safety and swimming skills for all. Thank you. So, Rockaway Water Safety Coalition is strenuously advocating for the support of Senate Bill 2207 and its sister Assembly Bill 728, which would require water safety instruction in New York State schools, grade K through 12, and age-appropriate instruction would also include proper use of flotation devices, awareness of water conditions, how to respond if caught in rip currents, proper supervision of swim areas, safe behaviors in, on, and around the waters, layers of protection and other pool fencing around pools and open bodies of water that are going to be used for swimming, the importance of formal swimming lessons, the importance of understanding how you should avoid alcohol and substance use when around water, and also the importance of CPR training to help and assist when someone is in a drowning situation or suffering an accident in the water. Young people who have access to water safety and swim skill education in our schools will definitely have the knowledge to remain safe in, on, and around the water. And this will lead to exploring many recreational opportunities, as previously mentioned. There's actually 32 water-based sports, which will help not only with our physical, but our mental well-being. And also it presents wonderful career opportunities, not only in the aquatics field as lifeguards and water safety instructors, but as first responders, police, fire, emergency services techs, military, etc. Providing this education in our schools will actually be the best way to eliminate the barriers that we've been feeling and experiencing over the generations of lower social economic situations, as well as our historical backgrounds. So this would provide an opportunity, an equal opportunity for all to access water.
Coming into time.
Okay, thank you. And create a more inclusive water-based community. And we do have some examples of successful countries that have taken this under their wing. As you can see here, Australia, England, Finland, the Netherlands, Norway, New Zealand, and Singapore. So what I would just like to kind of wrap up with, that once it was true that a good way of keeping your family safe from the water, protected from the water, was to keep them away from the water. But now that no longer is true. And because water will actually seek you out. Think of the recent tropical storm Ida, in which almost 50 people were killed between New York and New Jersey states. And in my own community of Woodside, Queens, 13 of those people drowned in their own basements. So if they had our training, know before you go, that certainly would not have happened. Here we have a request, of course, for you to join us in supporting the state bills 2207 and Assembly 728. And we have 3 sign-on letters, one for individuals who must be living in New York State, and the other 2 organization and business letters, which may be signed by companies in and out of New York State. So we hope that you will be able to participate with us there. Shanna?
Thank you, Shawn, so much. Yes, please let us know if you have any questions about the sign-on letters or the petition. We'd appreciate you sharing that with your networks. In terms of next steps, there's plenty of advocacy to do surrounding this bill. We need thousands of signatures, so please join us. There's a lot of opportunity to build new partnerships, as already mentioned. There's a lot of lacking infrastructure here in New York City, both for physical amenities like pools, and community centers and job training centers for lifeguards. There's also a lot of programming needs surrounding swimming skills and basic water safety education and understanding our natural environment and what open water means when you interact with it. So there's a lot of new partnerships to build there, and we're open to that in the Water Safety Coalition. And we're really looking to build partnerships beyond Rockaway in general. So if you'd like to join us, please do, and we're open to chatting about that. And we're looking forward to our panel discussion next. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. That was a great presentation and a great overview of some of the strategies and challenges that we're facing when we think about how we're going to make sure that we've got safe, secure, and equitable access to our water bodies. There's a whole host of questions for me that come to mind that I'd love to hear you guys talk about. One question I have for Dan, Kara, and Karen is this question of the classification of a water body for primary or secondary contact and the underlying water quality for small sections of a very large water body. So the entire water body might be classified as secondary contact, but we've got lots of areas along that very large water body that consistently meet primary contact. And it seems to me that we've got a little bit of a disconnect between how we are using definitions of water body classifications and how they impact where we decide we can have formal approved access to the water. And also the second piece of that question is, how do we incorporate this nearshore water quality question when our water quality monitoring strategies are about the center of the river, right? Where most people don't ever go. I'd love to hear your guys' thoughts about how do we balance that out from a public policy perspective, practically, when we are looking for places to put approved swimming.
I can speak to, we're designing around existing regulatory code in hopes that, we can, of course, build swiftly and create small public access points. I think Dan can probably speak more to, some of the conversations that have been happening around reclassification of waters that I think would be a longer term goal for everyone here.
Yeah, I mean, what we see, there's always this, difficulty in that the Department of Health has jurisdiction over bathing beaches, but then the DEC or the DEP in the city has more jurisdiction over, every other water where people might be swimming. And the classifications are really there to guide management decisions. So it's back in whatever it was, the early 80s, when the state classified all the waters and said, okay, well, we're gonna, this is the use now of this water. So we're going to make sure it continues to meet the use for drinking water or continues to meet the use for recreation. But I think there isn't a really good, clear process for upgrading a standard to say, well, we want to change the use. We want more out of this water. People are using it or want to use it in a new way. I think we certainly see the evidence, like I tried to present, that people are using the water wherever they find it. They don't check the use classification that's an obscure document like we do when we're writing a comment letter on a public process. But I think, I want to hear what Karen thinks, but I also want to invite you, Chris, to offer some thoughts, because I know you have some good ones on this topic.
I guess, I would just say testing has been so, we tested for a number of years before we chose the site that we ended up using for the small pool. And education, as Dan says, for people who are going down to the water, they don't know what the classifications are. More people now know where the sewage is coming in our region. Like, we have really educated people about that. Like, you can't swim south of that. We swim, we do our river swim at 30 minutes before slack, in the ebb tide, so that we educate all of our swimmers why we do what we do. And I think that's very key to making this public policy real and have a life, is just really getting people to understand how this fairly complex river works, but millions of people live alongside it. So, hey, let's learn about it, you know, and the STEM project that the Plus Pool, the fact that you're in the schools, it's just an excellent way to basically teach.
Great. I appreciate everybody's insights there. I think one of the things that I think would be an interesting conversation is getting state DEC and state health to have a kind of a coordinated approach for how do we want to approach the public health aspects of nearshore water, whether, you know, both from where it's formally used and where it's informally used. And so we've got really two kind of sets of data streams that would come into us. We would have data that reflects the nearshore water where we expect to have human contact, either secondary or primary. And then we would have water from the middle channel, which is really an indication of overall water quality from an ecological perspective, right? And really begin to kind of separate these two classifications. You know, where do we expect people to interact with the water? And where do we expect to see, you know, broad water quality dynamics that are shaping the overall estuary, right? And really think about this question a little bit differently. I think that's a kind of a, you know, obviously it's a longer term conversation, but I think that might be one way for us to kind of split this discussion. You know, for folks in the audience, please feel free to chime in the chat box, and we'll be able to see the questions or point them directly to one of us, and we'll be able to see them. And we have a question for Kara, which is a challenge, right? About this equity question, really around Plus Pool, and how do we make sure that Plus Pool is an equity equilibrium, right? It's an intervention that supports our equity goals. And I've got really good answers for that. I will let you answer.
Well, I think our approach is to focus on our programming, making sure that we're providing platforms for everyone to participate and feel welcome. I think that as we move forward with the actual installation of a facility, whenever that may be, you know, our hope is that that will be co-designed with local community members, with the larger New York City community as a whole. One of the questions I pulled you guys for today before I think you signed in, you maybe got to see it, I don't know how it worked, but is, you know, what do you want to see in an East River floating swimming facility? We asked that to the parents of our bluefish swimmers. We asked that in the schools. We asked that to everyone, and we're, you know, it's an open dialogue to make sure that we're reaching as many communities as possible. And we can do that through some targeted programming with, you know, dedicated time for family swims, senior swims, things like that. That's our approach. But of course, there's also the potential for scalability. I mean, you know, we want to, this isn't necessarily a one-off thing that has to happen if people want it in multiple places and it becomes very popular. And not just in New York. I mean, there's cities around the world that have similar issues to water quality that this kind of technology and these kinds of systems can support. And we've already, as I mentioned, I believe, received interest to that regard. So that's been our approach so far. But if anyone who asked that question has ideas, send them our way. That's what we're here for.
So I just to echo on that, you know, I think what the equity question that's posed, you know, by Karen and Kara's project is that we're creating examples, right? So the private sector is coming together to create an example of how to get safe, reliable access to a water body that traditionally might not have been accessible. And that opportunity, I see that as a huge opportunity from the scalability standpoint, right? Once we have a technology that we think that works, once we have a strategy that we think that works, is that a spot for public sector investment, right? To create these open spaces and create the scalability. So I think that I'm totally on board with that. You know, another question that we have for both Kara and Karen is, you know, what is the relative cost of putting in one of these floating structures? Is it more economical to create a pool, a traditional pool that might be near the water, rather than creating a floating structure? If you guys can address that, that would be great.
Swimming pools are very expensive. Traditional swimming pools, the maintenance of them are very expensive, you know, chemicals and regular maintenance and things like that. We don't anticipate that this is going to be, you know, exceed that. Our initial estimated cost per plus pool, which, you know, I'm sure will rise as we continue the piloting process and everything, is $25 million. As a frame of reference, the McCarran Park pool renovation was, you know, a $50 million project, right? So there, I think there, you know, part of our goal is to make it, you know, economical. But also I think, you know, there's a lack of access to real estate in New York City. It's very hard to build pools in the on land in a city where real estate is so expensive. So even if the costs are comparable, I think actual access to square footage is a challenge. And we have this resource all around us. That's, you know, the intent of Plus Pool was not necessarily to build a pool, it was to reconnect people with the water that surrounds them, to democratize the waterfront and really, you know, reconnect people to something that we once enjoyed very much. So that's our approach. I'm not saying that we shouldn't build pools too. I think that would be wonderful. As Shawn mentioned, we have very few pools for a city this large in the population. So, but you know, I ask me in a couple of years too, but when the prices go up, but yeah, I do think it's economical.
Oh yeah, I concur. I mean, you know, it's the price tag for the prototype pool that we put in. It's probably about $125,000 in the end, but that was with massive volunteer labor, and you know, it wasn't a real cost. But bring it on, build pools. Nobody's building them. I mean, it's so expensive to build swimming pools, and cities and towns are not taking it on. They're legacy pools. You can see it in New York, the WPA, the biggest pools were built during the WPA project. So, and the other thing is, you know, and I mean, I hear Pete's voice in my ear, because his vision was, you know, let's buy all this stuff off the shelf. Let's get decking that you see, you know, at boat launches and boat piers that we would build into squares. And his vision was you could put it in the back of a pickup truck and build these up and down the river. He was very keen on keeping the cost down, and also not chlorinating the water. If, you know, his goal was to restore this river, and to make sure that the river was safe to swim in. And so for both of those reasons, we haven't gone around, you know, thinking about building cement pools. But hey, you know, more swimming pools would be great.
Yeah, yeah. So I love that phrasing about this is democratizing the waterfront. Right, democratizing access, reconnecting communities to water bodies that traditionally would have had access, but for very large infrastructure planning that separated people.
And I just want to make one point. Our pool is free, the small pool, and it's a wonderful thing to stand by it and to have a mother or father come along with their kids and ask how much money they need to go in it. And when they say it's free, when you say it's free, you see the look on their faces. I mean, Beacon has a large immigrant population. It is a big deal. Pools are expensive, you know, even public pools. And so that has been important to me, that any kid could come in.
Dan, I saw your hand up. You want to jump in on this one?
Just really quickly, I think the other thing that is lightly touched on, but is worth noting, there's something just magical about swimming outdoors, and that landscape or the skyline, to be out in that water in those places in different lights and sunrise and sunset, and you just can't recreate that in a lot of pool settings, and it's a very special thing.
Amen.
Well, so speaking of pools and places to learn to swim, I'd like to swing this back to Shanna and Shawn. So one of the things I did when I was at the health department was we created a program called Making Waves, which was driven by our recognition of New York City being a pool desert. Kids don't have easy access to any pools whatsoever. That the Board of Education has lots of pools that are underutilized, and connecting communities, primarily communities of color, to those pools to learn how to swim. That program this summer is probably going to teach around 5,000 kids to swim. And hopefully with the new administration will be a further commitment at a full-blown program. We could be doing 20,000 kids a year easy with that program. So this learning to swim strategy, this water safety strategy, we've got some opportunities, at least in the city, to address that. We had a question from the audience about this idea of the water comes to us, this idea that you spoke to, Shawn. So if you could talk a little bit about that, I think that would be a good follow-up for folks. And then if you guys could kind of give your perspective on what is this relationship between open water and constructed pools, and the relationship between those two things, and how do we match those up?
So my comment about the water seeking us out comes from two places. The first part of the comment was one that I had heard often when I would go into the community and speak about water safety, particularly our programming in Black churches, civic organizations, various community meetings. And, families would say to me, well, this is how we keep our families safe. We keep them away from the water. And, that worked very well until a little thing called Superstorm Sandy in particular hit, not too, how many years ago was that? 9 years or so. And in the Rockaways, for example, where you have a peninsula 11 miles long and 3 miles wide, it doesn't take a Superstorm Sandy to have the ocean waters meet the bay. It happens with more frequency than that. So, in my own mind, I started after Superstorm Sandy to look around and think that, things are happening around us. We are seeing our water levels starting to rise every year. We are seeing our tropical storms and hurricanes not only getting stronger every year, but more of those storms. You may remember that 2 years ago, we had to go to a different alphabet. There were so many storms, right? We're in the Greek alphabet. And then, of course, here in New York, we're like under the triple threat because our waterfronts now are being developed as never before in our lifetimes. And that on one level is great because it's providing access to open water that we never had before. So if you do understand the dynamics and the nature of that particular body of water and have the swimming skills to safely navigate it, that's great. But most of our citizens do not have either of those, the knowledge of the particular type of water nor the swimming skills. So we are really at risk, and I'm afraid that our drowning rates are just going to go through the roof. So Know Before You Go was really a program developed for all of us, whether we are swim skilled or not, to really reflect that swimming skills are very, very important, but they sit in the context of something called the environment. And we don't teach about the environment, and we need to, because our environment is becoming ever more watery. And that's only going to continue as the decades move forward. So how, if we don't educate our youth and our parents, but particularly our youth, how are they going to navigate this world safely? it puts me in mind of thinking back to when we had to legislate seatbelts, for example, right? This is a little bit like that. We are going to need to legislate that people learn about water safety. So even bike helmets, like these things that keep us safe for some reason, as humans, we just don't want to do the thing that's, the best thing to keep us safe. We struggle against that, but we need it. We need it to survive and thrive.
And just to add to
Shannon,
that,
you want to chime in? Yeah.
yeah, just, in a place like Rockaway, it's really challenging because most people, their experience with the water is a dangerous body of water in the ocean. And there's no pool on the peninsula that's publicly accessible for people to learn swimming skills. Swimming in a pool, as we all know, is incredibly different than swimming in an ocean or swimming in a river, or swimming in a lake. They're all different experiences. And in a lot of ways, you need different knowledge and skill sets to be able to safely engage in those bodies of water. So I think it's really important that as a city and different nonprofits and governmental agencies, we really think creatively about how we're educating people, whether it's through legislation, whether it's through public programming. I'm from North Carolina originally. I go to the Outer Banks regularly. I went to a public program touring a lighthouse, and the first thing they talked about before they talked about the lighthouse at all was rip currents. They showed every single person on the tour a diagram of a rip current and how to identify them and how to interact with them. And I think we need to bring that to New York City. If people are in Rockaway and they're talking about piping plovers, why not start the conversation with talking about ocean safety and how to interact with these local environments? We're not doing that nearly enough right now. And that's not only on government, but that's on all of us, both as citizens, community groups, nonprofit organizations. There's so much potential to work together to make a broader impact and kind of implement these sort of policies so that it's not just like a new idea that we have a swim program. It's just kind of systemic. It's part of the fabric of the city that we're a city of water. And, it's kind of crazy to me, honestly, that these are like new ideas here because they're up and down the East Coast. If you go to any beach, you see visuals of rip currents and how to swim out of them regularly. In Rockaway, there are 3 parts of the Rockaway Boardwalk where you have signs that have a rip current image. There are signs that talk about the dangers of rip currents throughout the boardwalk, but there are 3 signs that show a visual, and that's an issue, So I think we just really have to think more creatively and broadly about those things. And then just also really quickly to speak a little bit more to the public pool thing. For a place like Rockaway, to build a pool through the parks process would be $100 to $150 million, something like that. That's a lot of money. Not that it's insurmountable. It is possible if we get elected officials to put a pot of money in a capital budget. It's not impossible. But something like Plus Pool, it is more affordable. It might even be faster. City processes are, again, they're doable, but they are lengthy. It is something for a place like Rockaway that it's so desperately needed to have any amenity where people can learn how to swim. It might be something that is sort of a better option than going through the city process. So
yeah,
there's a lot of opportunity out there, and we all have to work together to meet these issues and needs.
And just,
so
just
those are all great. Those are all great points. We're running a little bit over time, so I'm going to pull us in, and there'll be other opportunities for us to engage in these conversations. Right, the Hudson River Foundation, your coalition, the work of the Riverkeeper, the HEP committee. There's going to be opportunities for us to continue this conversation. So for the folks who hung with us all the way to the end, thank you. We're going to continue this conversation going forward. We're going to find ways to do it. I want to thank all the panelists for your great input, great presentations, great ideas. The last one I'm going to kind of pick on is I love Shannon's idea of that safety talk on the Rockaways. Every time the Parks Department brings anybody out for a tour, we do a safety talk. We do a riptide safety talk, and we build in that safety culture orientation to a lot of this activity. That we just build it into what we do, right? The same way the paddlers do when somebody comes in new to get into a boat launch. There's a safety talk. We should be building those things in. I love that idea. And with that, I will say thank you to everybody.
Let's do it,
We'll
Chris.
keep the conversation going.
Yeah, thanks, Chris, and all the panelists. That was terrific. I want to give a shout out to Rob Buchanan from the Billion Oyster Project and Harbor and Estuary Program Public Access Work Group, who was a kind of co-conspirator on putting this together with all of you. If folks are interested, as Chris mentioned, I think there's a lot of forums for this conversation to keep going. One other is the Public Access Work Group, and I invite folks on the attendees to check out the HEP website, and you can figure out how to join our next meeting. And with that, I think we're closing the day on the conference. And the one other thing I should say is if you do want to pose another question or continue the conversation, please post a question in the community board, and we'll keep the conversation going that way. So again, thanks to everybody, all the participants, the panelists, and moderator. And we will see you tomorrow with a bunch of other great sessions.